Hi everyone, good evening, hello. Thanks all for joining us on this, well, rather dark Thursday night in November. I'm Tom Scaramuzza, so I am the chair for the IMechE Railway Division Milton Keynes Centre. I presumably met some of you already when we were able to meet in person. So again, welcome to this evening's event. We'll be looking at the service introduction of the Class 745 and 755 units. Just before we kick off, I am going to take the opportunity to remind you of some future events that we've got. So, as you can imagine, given the current situation, all of our railway divisions are presenting from home or from the office, but certainly not in person. What this does mean is that there are events going on all the time, and it's far easier to join these events. So what we are doing is we are all looking to help with the promotion of our events. So in case you were interested and you were free, on the 17th of November, the Northeastern Division will be covering the decarbonisation of the railway, and that will be led by David Shuries. So if some of you were at our September event, you will have heard David talking about decarbonisation, so one well worth looking out for. And then the Northern Division will be covering railway performance, so managing performance, and that will be run by Nick Donovan of Northern. So, and that's the first event's on the 17th of November, the second event's on the 19th. So both within the coming week. Just head over to the IMechE events page and they should pop up on there. Anyway, now we've got that out of the way, I would like to introduce our speaker, who's Steve Mitchell, and he's Head of Fleet North for Greater Anglia. So he was involved in the introduction of these trains into service as the Joint Project Manager for the Stadler FLIRT introduction, Engineering Director, Head of Engineering and Fleet Manager. So prior to that, he also worked for Alstom as the Engineering Manager for their Metro Trains division, helping introduce the 95 TS into service. What I would ask you to do is there is the opportunity to ask questions throughout. We will be doing questions at the end, but if you would like to pop your questions into the questions tab, we will pick those up at the end. If there's lots of them, I may group a few, so don't be surprised if you have a question that sounds a little bit like yours but isn't exactly yours. But it's just, if we've got a lot of them, I'll try and group some that are the same or similar together just to try and get as many of them answered, of course. So with that, it's my great pleasure to hand over to Steve Mitchell. So Steve, when you're ready, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Really good to be here and to be presenting online. On normal times, it would be Birdcage Walk or a similar venue, and you get a chance to catch up with some old friends as well as colleagues and meet some new people. However, in the current times, it's new technology that's bringing us together. I've presented to do with these new trains, the FLIRT trains, twice before. First presentation I did with Martino Celleghini before the trains were built, and very much introducing the train, its features, and what was different. I then gave a second presentation sometime later, looking at the depot and depot facilities, and also a little bit about the driver training. Today I'm expanding on that service introduction, a phase that we've just about come to the end to now. And I'm going to look at a few more subjects that come up in the process of bringing a new train into service. In terms of the content, I'm going to cover a little bit about our business. I won't go into that for too long, but for anybody who's not familiar with the business, I'll cover that. I will cover very briefly a little bit about the FLIRT trains, and then I will look at some of the key areas of service readiness. I'm not going to cover everything because it is a very vast subject, but I'm going to pick out a few of the areas where we've had some issues and we've learned some lessons. So I do apologise to anybody who's been involved in new trains, because some of it might feel a little bit like teaching your grandmother to suck eggs. I'm not going to apologise for sometimes stating the obvious, because I know sometimes we missed the obvious as we were going through the introduction. So, looking at the Greater Anglia business, for those that don't know us, we provide trains for the east of England, everywhere from Sheringham in the north to Liverpool Street in the south, covering the coast and then as far in as places like Peterborough and Cambridge. We operate trains that are rural trains, suburban trains, we have an airport service, and then we have the intercity between London and Norwich, so a good variety of train types. We're roughly about 3,000 employees, sometimes it's a few more, sometimes it's a few less, and sadly I've coloured the figures to do with passengers a day and train journeys run a day, because at this present moment in time they are somewhat depleted, but in normal times it's about 350,000 people a day and almost 2,000 diagram legs a day. It covers about 9,500 kilometres of route, and as I say, geographically it's about 135 north to south and 94 east to west. The trains themselves, we've purchased 58 trains. 20 of them are 12-car trains, half of them tailored towards an intercity service with first class and bistro, the other 10 tailored towards airports with additional luggage space. In addition, we've purchased 24 4-car bimodes. From the diagram, you can see the power pack in the middle, which generates the electricity to power what is basically an electric train when the train isn't under a pantograph. We, in addition, have 14 3-car bimode trains, slightly shorter, almost identical, other than literally the missing vehicle. Some of the key features, same as many new trains, obviously aircon throughout, Wi-Fi plug sockets, modern PIS with real-time information, seat reservation on intercities, forward-facing CCTV, all the normal features that you'd expect, both from a passenger perspective, but also some operational things there as well. Some of the innovation on this train, which I've covered in detail before: low floor access with a sliding step, articulated bogies shared between vehicles, the bimode operation, and actually the reduction to one door per vehicle. So, the next slide is really kind of a bit of a summary of service introduction. You have a business as usual train operating company that's merrily going around its business of running a good train service, trying to use an evolutionary process to eke a little bit more performance out of the railway with all those good things. 600 odd million pound a year turnover. And then for 3 to 4 years in parallel, this project's running, again, buying 600 million pounds worth of new trains. And they're merrily going along each side each other, with some consultation for quite a long period of time. And then you come to introduce the trains. And at that point, if you happen to be there, it probably feels a little bit like the picture on the screen at the moment. The gigantic train operating company day-to-day business suddenly impacted by a multi-million pound project all coming together. So it's really, really important that you're planning for this, and it's really, really important that you're up front for this. And therefore you go through a service introduction process. So what does service introduction cover? Well, I've done a bit of a mind map. It's quite small. It covers many, many different things. In summary, it doesn't leave much of your business unchanged. You might argue the way you collect revenue stays the same, maybe, but even there, hopefully you're getting a bit more of it for new trains. But the way you service your trains, your depot, the way you move from new trains to old trains, all of that is impacted. Your operation, it is root and branch, and it goes into just about every department in every area. So that in itself, is quite gigantic when you think about, particularly in a case of a train operating company where they're not just changing a small proportion of their train fleet, but they're actually changing pretty much most of it. So going into the first area that I'm going to cover, servicing of trains and some of the issues that we've had arise. Something as basic as a carriage wash. Will it wash the new trains? The profile of the train is different. therefore needs to be adjusted so it doesn't cause damage to the new train. As a consequence, you need to adjust it. That instantly says, when do you adjust it? Because it won't clean the old trains as effectively. So again, there's a transitional arrangement that needs to be made going between the two. Sanding. Quantities of sand use have increased with the change in rolling stock, not least because there's a lot more trains than there were before, but also the sanding systems on the train are working perhaps more efficiently than the ones were before. So the whole process of sanding is changing. Have you got the right places to sand? Have you got the right infrastructure to sand? Interfaces between the train and infrastructure need refinement. When we went through the design process, we actually created interface documents looking at all of these ways that, particularly the depot interface, fueling, things like that. Have you got them right? And what we found is, even though we did a lot of upfront work, there was still many areas that when it came to actually trying the trains with the infrastructure in the depot, they needed tweaking, they needed adjustment. And again, in the pressure of a service introduction, finding these things out early before you're having to fuel and AdBlue 10 trains a night is quite useful. Ability to clean a 12-car train. For those that attended the last presentation, one of my strap lines was "Don't buy 12-car trains." This is perhaps another reason here that actually, if you need to undertake exterior manual cleaning or hand bashing, as many of us know it as, it's not so easy with a 12-car train. Environmental legislation means that you need to control the emissions coming off the side of that train. Where are you going to do it? Where big enough in your depot? And actually that also applies, sadly, to fatality events as well. If you have a 12-car train and you need to clean it after a fatality, where have you got? Where can you clean that within the depot? And for us, it was rather late in the day that we were finding solutions to that. We didn't want to be leaving it as late as we did. Quantity of facilities for the number of trains as well. You do some calculations and you work out how often and the size of your CET tank or the size of your bistro tank, and you do those calculations, work out where those facilities are and where you're going to put them. I suppose the lesson learned is don't get stuck on the high level maths. It's very easy to say, every train on average needs emptying every other day. But when you're taking into account service disruption, and when you break your fleet down, a good example for us is the intercities and our airports, exactly the same capacity for CET, exactly the same water capacity, the same number of toilets, it's all the same. But if we run a train on an intercity, the usage of the CET is nowhere near the same as the usages on the airport. So even if you've got the facilities for your fleet as a whole to be able to empty it, does that mean that the intercities where they stable are still needing to be emptied, what is almost every single day, and maybe the airports every 4 to 5 days? So it might work at a high level. It needs to work in the detail. Which then perhaps brings me on to some of those things. Making sure that you've got a constant eye on the theory versus practice. Building up to service introduction, there's a lot of theory going on, not much practice. The sooner you get that practice, the sooner you see something that's possible, take that opportunity. The devil's in the detail, I've just said it. Avoid the high level maths. It's not good enough to look at number of trains per day that need CETing. It needs to be where are they going to be CET, down to what time are they going to be CET'd, almost which diagram is the CET diagram. If you don't get that early, then actually you'll probably get your facilities wrong and they might be in the wrong place and you'll be left trying to adjust. So you need a detailed servicing plan that's effectively bottom up. I've already said it, 12 cars are a lot harder to find solutions to than the 3 or the 4 cars. So if you're involved in buying a new fleet, please don't buy 12-car fixed formations. You need contingency as well on the servicing, making sure that you're planning for when it goes wrong, when service disruption comes along, that contingency is built in. Things like agreeing the changeover point for facilities from old to new. You know, the end state that you're aiming for might work, but is it going to work all the way through the transition as well? Is there a transition plan? I know this is a particular point, but when we were doing the design for the power pack, we wanted to, as it were, copy with pride the method of putting AdBlue in trains. And we actually started asking across the industry, and we found that already people that had trains that use AdBlue had different ways of filling them. So whereas most of our trains can turn up with a bulk loader and pretty much be fueled in most locations, we were finding the same isn't true of AdBlue. So perhaps a message more for the wider industry: how do we move towards a common standard for something like AdBlue? It's going to be with us for the next perhaps 20 odd years at least. So if that's the case, perhaps we need to find a way of standardising it. You might not need to put AdBlue in your train every day, but it's still going to limit fleets if they suddenly find that they have to have different filling facilities. The next area that I'm going to cover is a bit about route proving. For anybody that's not aware, route proving is that last practical exercise where you are again turning the theory into practice, making sure that your trains that you've worked out can fit in your platform, that the step heights are within standards, that's all the case, and that it all does work. Route proving, the paths are expensive and time consuming, so if you're planning a project, under-egg that, don't underestimate it. You'll have a lot of people, particularly those that are responsible for the finances, trying to find ways of cutting it down, but it can end up a bit of a false economy if you're not careful. We've got an ASDO database, and repeating over and over again for every new database going through the safety validation is quite painful. If you can find a way of avoiding that, that would be useful. The other thing we also learned, we've got low floor trains. Many of our platforms, you don't need a ramp. We still have ramps at many of those platforms because people still prefer them. But actually what we found was that ramps for low floor trains is actually harder, not easier, than normal ramps. That we will end up needing a different ramp for a different height difference between platform, largely because the ramp can't go on the step. Structurally, it can't go on the step. So we actually found that ramp provision and then testing ramps was harder. Curved platforms, if you're having a driver-only operated CCTV system, or OTCM as it's often called, curved platforms are a bit of I suppose, the nemesis. The quicker you can get your train to your worst curved platform to make sure that actually the lens selection that again was done in theory in CAD actually delivers the image that your drivers need to make sure it covers the full length of the platform, and you can tick off that standard, the better. We found that we had to change at least one camera lens on our worst platform. That was happening very late in the day on service introduction, not when we wanted it to. So the quicker you can do it, the better. I mean, actually, the final thing on there, overall, our route proving went quite well. We felt it was quite successful, and it is actually an area that we did a lot of upfront planning for. So I wouldn't want people to go away with a message, certainly on route proving, that hadn't happened. Key points, as I say, plan ahead, long way ahead. The success that we had on route proving, we felt, was because we did that. We innovated something called Mission Room, and I know that's been subject to other presentations. It's basically a piece of software which, by using cameras on your old train, effectively monitors the side, the front, the back of the train, and allows you, as the photograph's almost indicating there, to see every platform from every direction that you're going to go, so that when you're planning things like stop boards and signal sighting, you aim to be able to do the real thing with one hit and not have to revisit too many times. As I said, plan the curved platforms early. And the other thing as well, for route proving, it's worth early on establishing a small but competent team with a mix of both operations and engineering experience. Get them with their heads together early, dedicate them to the task, and make sure that, probably at least a year ahead, they're planning for this route proving exercise. And then finally, ASDO databases, find a way that the ASDO database, every time you change that ASDO database. You're not repeating the route proving in order to maintain your seal certificate. Otherwise, you will, on a very, very regular basis, be finding you're trying to take trains to all your platforms in order to release next versions of software. So the next area is processes, and of course the high-level processes, of course, the SMS in almost any train operating company. When you move from in-house maintenance, which at Crown Point we did, to third-party maintainer, this leads to big changes. And in fact, even if you have third-party maintainer doing some of your maintenance, as we have at Ilford, it still leads to a very, very significant change. You know, new fleet has big changes for the business, and in particular for engineering. Don't spend too much time discussing. Too much time has been spent discussing the standard of engineering change when you actually need to be using your engineering change. And what I mean by that is the part of the authorization process takes the trains up to a point where the train is authorized. There's an agreed design. And then from that point, you're kicking in your engineering change process, and there is you're going to go through a stage of making sure that the standard of what's in that engineering change, particularly to do with software, which is an area the Office of the Rail Regulator is particularly interested in at the moment, is up to scratch. That can lead to quite long discussions with your manufacturer and your maintainer as to what's needed for engineering change. And sort of the trust me, we know what we're doing versus actually that's fine, but we need to see the results and it needs to be written down. And if you're doing that at the point that you're then rapidly trying to make changes because there are changes needed, that in itself is a barrier. You need to have those conversations and establish the engineering change standard up front before you need to use that process. Processes for the depot operations, the failure management and commercial processes weren't right. They all are now working differently to how they did, and they're still not right. It's going to have to be a rapid evolutionary process if you're moving from one way of working to another. So picking up on that, some of the, as I say, lessons learned. SMS is going to change at the top. That's for the whole business, not just engineering. They're going to be changing dispatch processes. There's a whole host of stuff that's going to be changing. So again, plan early and resource early for that. The owning managers of each SMS procedure are going to have a lot of work coming that way. They need to know that. Need to set ECM responsibilities for those not involved in rolling stock. That's the entity in charge of maintenance responsibilities. Split up into the 4 different levels. Make it clear up front that you know how that's being discharged. Your contract might set out who's responsible for what, but you also need to make sure legislatively you've got that all aligned as well. As I said, install engineering change before the handover of units and set that standard. The other thing is when you're integrating effectively 2 organisations together, make sure you document that governance structure early. There's a little diagram there that begins to show the interfaces that we have with our manufacturer and maintainer. Reuse where you can, but do not be precious if it doesn't work. Use as many of the procedures you've got from your old stock as you can and adapt them and update them. But where it becomes obvious that that process is now not fit for purpose because the world's moved on, don't be precious about it. Get that message across to everybody involved as well. It can be quite easy to find resistance to change because this process has worked for the last 20 years. Why would we want to change it? Well, actually there are things that are different and there might be a need to change. So expect to plan and refine these processes. Don't think that what you do on day 1 is going to be what's there on day 20, day 60, and even hundreds of days later. They are going to need refinement because of the level of change. So that needs to be planned for. Moving on to the Cascade, again, just defining Cascade. This is the transition from new to old fleet in perhaps numbers and planning. This is actually really, really important to any service introduction. What service on a particular day is a new train? What service on a particular day is an old train? Where's your flexibility between those services? One of the issues we had, too many fingers in the pie. Yeah, different departments had different reasons for wanting different services to change first, whether that be revenue, whether that be practical, whether that be the infrastructure team wants their route to go back a bit because they're not quite ready. So there's lots of different, let's just say, motives, feelings and thoughts that go into the cascade. And if you're not careful, you can get too many false assumptions that are made surrounding movements and stabling. You know, bit like what I said earlier on, that here with a cascade plan, the devil is in the detail. It's absolutely in the detail. You know, again, high-level change-out plans don't work. You need to be basically working at diagram levels. And even if your cascade plan, the end state works, everything's fine once you've finished your change, the transitional states will have other issues. Kind of hinted it on things like servicing earlier on, that even if your end state, where is your CET, your carriage wash machines, they all work okay. Actually, when you're in a transitional state and you have a mix of legacy fleet and a mix of new fleet, they can catch you out. Yeah. Lease end dates, they arrive more quickly than we all hoped for. Many people throughout the industry will almost actually rely on the trains being late. There's another lesson learnt there as well. But those lease dates come early. Be up front with the Roscoes. Talk to them early. Make sure I'm not wanting to border on commercial issues in this presentation, but if you're not careful, you can find yourself very uncomfortably in what we might call a distressed purchasing situation. I.e. trains disappearing, new trains not quite as ready as you would like them, and that's a very uncomfortable position to be in. So revision control, we had issues with revision control early on, probably led a little bit by the too many fingers in the pie, but it's revision control is something that's easy to fall down on. So picking up on some of the lessons learnt surrounding that, absolutely agree the starting point. It absolutely seems obvious, but it's not. Yeah, it's very, very easy that you think you have a legacy fleet, but you know, every 6 months we get a new timetable out anyway, and whereas that timetable might remain largely the same, it does already tweak itself even without actually having new trains. So you need to understand what the starting point is and when this cascade plan is effectively coming from. Make sure that you're managing the assumptions and risks that are going with it, as well as the actual detail of the plan. If you're not managing the assumptions and risks, then you will get caught out. Set some realistic but not pessimistic targets. In fact, actually, not on the slide, I'd almost go as far as saying they need to be mildly optimistic. Hard when dates of perhaps new train arrival and our trains ready slip backwards, but there is a danger of falling into the under promise to over deliver, and our experience is if you start doing that, it can almost give excuses for everything that's related to service introduction to slip as well, and you can't afford to be doing that. You still need to have a challenge in the dates. Yeah, the cascade itself took us a while to get there, but it is actually, unfortunately, a big spreadsheet. It is a very big spreadsheet exercise, and it is bottom up, devil in the detail, which means you're going to need an owner. You're going to need at least one person, more than one person that's actually managing that, who's going to be spending pretty much most of their time looking at it. I'm speaking to the IMechE, so everybody should know exactly what I mean by engineering control on that spreadsheet. It needs to be engineering controlled. It needs revision levels. We're at version 18 at the moment, but we have to confess, as I say, one of the lessons learned, we probably didn't engineering control it early enough. There probably should have been at least another 18 versions before that. Legacy withdrawal and issues surrounding legacy withdrawal are just as important as actually new trains coming in. The handback process, how are you managing your dilapidations, where are the trains going to be stabled, is just as important as it is managing that for all the issues surrounding the new trains arriving. if you're not careful, you could create a bottleneck, and we certainly came close to it on a number of occasions where actually you can't hand the trains back fast enough in order to allow the new trains in. So again, need a close handle in your Cascade plan. That Cascade plan, if I go back very briefly to the previous slide, revision control, and that's what helped make sure that the whole thing is managed. Logistics moving units as well needs to be taken into a Cascade plan. It's all very well having an ambitious change-out program, but you are putting additional moves in when you swap trains around, just getting them in the right place for their diagrams. That's a workload for the operations teams, and sometimes about moving the units off patch. So in creating your Cascade plans, don't forget the logistics, that actually they're part of it as well. Moving on, safety. Safety service introduction. I suppose the way that I'm coming at this is the putting into service bit is your NOVO and DEBO assessment of the train and the tick in the box. So that's putting into service. The RRR gives a tick in the box. But you also need to put into use, actually it says putting into service, spot mistake on my slides. It should say PIU stands for putting into use. That putting into use is something that you manage through your SMS, and it's about taking the risks that are exported from the design of the train and managing them. Exported SRACs need to be managed and closed. Many are closed by the operator through service readiness. So as you train your drivers in a particular driver depot, you tick the box and say, yes, we have competent drivers. This can often be route by route. And therefore, many of the aspects for putting into use and putting trains into use, it's not one big tick in the box, a bit like a putting into service. It can be actually managed on almost a route by route basis, and needs to be managed on a route by route basis. The logical conclusion from that, and I think probably my main message, is that the safety team, the people that are managing that process, who are managing the SRACs and the safety side of things, they need to be absolutely embedded in that service readiness process. It has to be almost one and the same thing, not quite, but they have to be there, because otherwise, if you're going to do a route by route rollout, your safety won't be managed in that regard. So, or the safety side of things can be holding everything up. So, moving on to the next area. The next area is actually a bit more about managing this change, I suppose, at a more holistic level. And again, issues arising. Communication was occurring, but it wasn't enough. Back to this message I have, that it's hardly part of your business that isn't touched by it, and you're trying to still run a significant business at the same time. And those two things together, communicating and everybody's eye is still on the day job. Yeah. Rate of change is rapid and needs rapid response. It can't work on a calendar base every 4 weeks we have a meeting. It's not going to work on that basis. It's not that evolutionary process that I spoke about at the beginning, where you're trying to eat the last bit of performance, and whether that be financial or reliability out of a top. This is revolutionary change, and it needs to be managed in that way. There needs to be enough time and resource to manage that change. It's not just going to be achieved by the people that you would normally have in the business. There is a challenge there, because actually, if you start taking people out of your business to do that, how does the day job get done? And that in itself is a challenge. Projects working to their deadlines, not the Cascade deadlines. I mean, I know it's a particularly, a point, but when we were managing this overall, we were, using, I suppose, usual PMO style project management, RAG rated sheets. You can see some of the examples as part of my graphics. And a project might say, yep, we're on time to deliver CET. And what we began to find, thankfully relatively early on, was that the green rating used by the project had been set green by the fact that they'd been out to tender, got some timescales, agreed a project timescale, and they were working to that. Actually, if you measured it against when it was needed, it was red. And it's making sure that from I suppose, a project management perspective, that the deadlines throughout the whole of this process are linked back to your Cascade plan. When is it that it's needed? Not are you green against what seems a reasonable timescale for doing the job? Because if it turns red and it's impossible, you've got to think of a different answer, because it's going to slow your introduction. So project team and business and unit and manufacturer and maintainer. Well, if I draw those kind of just 4 core dots on a page, the number of interconnecting comms is quite vast. So there's lots of opportunity for it to go wrong. Engineering within the project team, engineering within the normal business, the manufacturer, the maintainer's engineering team. There's lots of comms. Comes back to comms. So moving on to some of the lessons learned then, this introduction needs to be managed at multiple levels. There's an overall service readiness, there's an overall introduction plan, but you need to be looking at a root level and then cascading down to even a lower level than that. Good management practice and governance practices are needed right from the beginning. They need to be installed early. Clear governance from top to bottom across business to project, with some clear, almost gate review, go/no decisions type thing baked in for your first service in, for every route that's rolled out. That needs to be very, again, almost engineering control to it. Clear validation of the information and target dates. The deadline is what I just said. The deadline is the Cascade deadline. It's not the deadline that the project have come up, because it's a reasonable deadline. The beat rate for this comms, the beat rate for this process needs to be as a minimum for your Cascade planning every week. We still run almost the strategic Cascade planning meeting as a separate meeting once a week, but there has to be a daily forum as well. And again, alongside a lot of the normal business meetings, we've still got daily forums concentrating on this kind of stuff. Dashboards need to be easy to read, very straightforward in the language that everybody understands, and widely distributed so everybody's literally on the same page. This is going to need a separate project team to pull together again. Service readiness is going to need people coming out of the business to do this and working between the business and the project. And again, it might be tempting to think, who have we got available? But actually, you almost need to be asking, who are the best people? Who are the best people at business change? Who's got a track record of being able to make changes with our business? Because it might feel you don't want to afford to take them out of your normal business, but actually they are the best people to be doing this. You're going to need to make rapid changes. And then the next thing is, your trains start coming in, look to integrate project team into your normal business as soon as you can. That reduces lines of comms. It increases the ownership of these new trains within the business. So actually, organisationally, you might have needed a project team for 3 to 4 years, but the sooner and more practically you can integrate that back into the business, the better. So overall then, just to draw a few conclusions, service introduction touches everything. Repeating the earlier message, is every part of a train operating company business, and actually goes beyond the train operating company as well. It will start affecting things that infrastructure managers do. Reuse what you can, but don't be precious. I keep repeating that. If you don't start with a blank piece of paper, look at what you've got, reuse it, but don't hold on to it. Again, grandmother the suck eggs, plan early, and don't rely on the trains being late. I've heard it too many times. It's all right, the trains won't be here, they won't work. If you're not careful inside your business, that can be used as an excuse for non-delivery. You can't do that. You've got to make sure that you're planning early and delivering early, so that you don't get caught out if the trains do happen to turn up on time. Good management trackers and robust reporting processes, absolutely key. The other key point I'm going to repeat again, engineering control on the Cascade plans and anything that goes with it. And then finally, again, avoid false economy. It can be very tempting in things like service introduction, Cascade planning, to feel that this is an area that might be able to be cut back on and that doesn't need the resource. But actually, if you do that and you don't look at the detail and you're not planning for the detail, it will come back and it will catch you out later. So thank you very much. My last slide basically offers the opportunity of any questions. So any questions? I'm really hoping the silence doesn't mean I got cut off electronically halfway through that presentation and haven't realised. So,
no, Steve, you're absolutely...
At least confirm that I wasn't talking to myself for 40 minutes.
Steve, you're absolutely fine. Thanks for that. I pressed the wrong button and I managed to disconnect myself, but I am now connected, I hope. So, yes, thank you for that. Really interesting stuff. I do have some attendee questions, so I will start to run through those. So I'll kick off with Tim's because it was the first, so Tim Duggar. So he asks, 10 and 12 car fixed set formation philosophy of a few years ago was justified for commuter railways because of the seat gains through loss of cabs, where 3x4 or 2x5 would traditionally be used. Are you saying that the disbenefits of servicing long fixed sets is greater than the benefits of more seats operationally?
No, I would actually, Tim, and if I was picking a solution, I would have specified the long trains with auto couplers in the middle, no cab, and a shunt control panel, almost London Underground style. They have trains where they maximise the seating capacity in the middle. Put shunt control panels in the middle of the train so that for maintenance purposes, whether it's put it on a wheel lathe, whether it's cleaning it for a fatality, whether it's lifting the train, the thing doesn't have to stay together. You can split a 12-car train for those purposes, but actually if they're permanent couplers and the 25 kV needs disconnecting, that in itself becomes a barrier for doing a fatality clean, and people then start needing to have 250-metre roads to put 12 cars over. So my solution, Tim, would be looking towards actually specifying, still not moving away from having avoiding the extra cabs and the cost and maintenance, the reliability and all the stuff that goes with it. But I would be looking to perhaps copy a bit of the London Underground model in the way that we do the trains. So they're more maintainable, they're more cleanable, they're more serviceable, because you can move them around a depot as a 6-car or as or maybe 3-4 cars. So.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that. I see that Neil Halliday's pointed out that CEN TC256 Working Group 43, to do with ground-based services, is currently preparing new Euronorm for exhaust treatment fluid, ORS32, also known as AdBlue, refilling equipment. So the EM will cover both the fluids connection and the electrical connection to control the supply pump cutoff. Yeah, so it sounds like there's a little bit of work being done, or quite a lot of work being done in the AdBlue area, just to bring that forward and make that slightly more efficient.
That's really good news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was a point more than a question. So let's have a look. Right, our next one is from Steve Rees, and he's saying, IMechE presentations apart, how do you capture these lessons for the future? Is there a formal review process in the company? I'm assuming by company you're referring to Greater Anglia there, Steve.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes, I could stop by yes. No, I'll explain a bit more. We've got another fleet of trains to introduce. So you can imagine that with our 720 introduction coming up, that internally within the business, we've run numerous forums across different departments about actually how we learn the lessons. And in fact, more than that, certainly within GA, we've actually made sure that we're using some of the same people and some of the same processes that we've learned as we've introduced the Stadler fleet, as we now move into doing the 720 fleet. So things like, have you an engineering controlled Cascade plan? We're on version 18. Well, there are going to be lots more because that's now rolling into the 720 fleet as well. But yeah, there was a point probably. I forget how long ago it is now, because the last 6 or 7 months seems to have flown by. But there was a point probably about 8-9 months ago where we were running lesson learned lessons across the business in order to capture that. We've also got forums within the Abellio group as well. So James Grundy runs a couple of forums across Abellio. One probably focused more at joint project managers on the purchase side, but there's also an operations forum as well that's looking at lessons learned from the parts of the business that have got new trains and new depots. Not quite service introduction, I might confess, but is still certainly trying to learn the lessons learned across the Abellio group as they go into new train introduction.
Brilliant. Yep, thanks for that. So Malcolm's got a question as well. So he's saying, "Hi Steve, how well are the new trains now performing? E.g. in Roger Ford's MTIN, so in terms of MTIN, how's it looking? Equally, thinking of other long trains, such as the Pendolinos, the Class 390s, isn't it a matter of configuring the support facilities to suit the train?"
Okay, I'll take the second one first on that.
Yep.
Yeah, it can be, but the moment you have a 240 metre train, very, very quickly, if you want to lathe without disconnecting that train apart, you need 500 metres worth of track. And having over the last 3 to 4 years, now on version about 6 or 7 about where we're going to fit a wheel lathe in order to do that, that becomes an issue. For those that have worked on the patch, they will know that Crown Point has suffered from not having a wheel lathe for a very, very long time. And in fact, the new wheel lathe is not going in at Crown Point. It's not going in because there is not room for a 500 metre track at Crown Point to do that. So it's going to end up going another location. So yeah, I can see that people have built a lot of their facilities around the fact that you've got a long train. But 12-car lifting roads are not easy to find. If you've got a 12-car train and you need to do some different maintenance and sending it away somewhere, you've reduced the number of places that you can send it. When we were looking at alternative lathe locations, the number of places that we could send the 12-car are actually Hornsey is the closest, because they do the 12 cars and they are doing the turning at the moment. But again, you're reduced in terms of the number of places that you can go. So yeah, you're right. We can build the facilities around it, and that is in fact what we are being forced to do. My view is that actually the operational flexibility of being able to split the train is worthwhile, particularly long term for a train's future. Answer the first question now. Not as we would like them, I think, is probably the summary. The EMUs are still just below 5,000. There are 12 cars, but they're below 5,000, which is disappointing. The BMUs are growing now. I think this month we're going to be just below 10, which is a little bit more respectable and heading in the direction. They're not at the levels, obviously, they're contracted to be at. I'm without wishing to volunteer too readily, at some point, once we've achieved the levels we want, I can quite happily come back and explain how we did it. But I have to confess, we're not there yet. So a lot of the issues that we have, I think, from other new train introductions I've seen, they're very common. The word software has become a dirty word inside of Greater Anglia, because the number of times you hear the word, that's a software problem, is continual. And my point about getting your engineering change or standards all sorted beforehand is related to that, because if you're not careful, your reliability growth can be stunted by the fact that if you can't turn around your engineering change because you haven't got the management software bottomed out with your manufacturer, that also can have an impact on what will be the next phase, which is the reliability growth of the train as well. So yeah, I'll quite happily come back and talk about the specific issues we had. I've seen nothing on this train that is different to what has happened on other new trains, and I'm sure that we'll go through a very similar process to get the train to where we want it to be.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. I've got a final question. I will keep an eye on I'll keep an eye on the question. So if anyone does want to put one in, by all means do so. Now's your last chance. And mine is to do with your final sentence. There was actually quite a nice segue, because one thing that I would say is possibly different about this introduction is the fact that Stadler are a new manufacturer as far as the UK is concerned. And if I'm not mistaken, this was their first project in the UK. So, what would you say were the first challenges? What would you say were the challenges with dealing with a new manufacturer in the UK? Was there anything that you really had to bring them around to from a cultural point of view, for example, for our railways?
I think each of my previous presentations that has also been a subject. When we were going through the design phase, it was absolutely clear that a lot of things that we take for granted and manufacturers that have delivered to the UK before just did. We were going through an education process with Stadler. They were quite ready to that in terms of they're keen to get in the UK, so they were willing to listen. But it's a case of how far and how much do you learn at that stage when you're looking at back in theory, and then how much do you learn when you get it in practice. And there is no doubt that, and in fact, even the subject I bring up of engineering change, if we were dealing with somebody who had been doing software changes in the UK for the last 10 to 15 years, then maybe the level of preparation of setting that standard wouldn't have been quite as necessary as it would be with a new manufacturer to the UK. So there's no doubt it's having an impact in terms of where we're moving. But the reliability, I mean, things like reliability are moving forward. Some of the other engineering issues that we have with the trains are getting fixed. They solve problems quite well. They've got their solid engineering background. So once they've got a grip of a problem, they solve it very, very quickly. They've actually inherited a lot of people from Greater Anglia as part of the maintenance. And actually that's been quite a good mitigation in that at least day to day, some of the tech office type people that are on site are people that have been working on trains in Greater Anglia for a very, very long time. They know people at a very personal level, and it's always as well to know people at a personal level to overcome problems as it is to know them through, as it were, through process. So that's actually assisted as well. But yeah, absolutely. I'll say almost every day, on a very regular basis, issues come up that are related to having a new manufacturer in the UK. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yep. No, thanks for that. I see Mike Corbett's raised a question. So first of all, thanks, Mike, for helping us organise this event. So yep, just wanted to give you a shout out there because you did help pull this together. So his question is, he's saying, first of all, well done, an excellent presentation, thank you. What is the impact on Crown Point resources regarding the new technology and change of employer? So as the first depot manager of Crown Point when it opened, Mike observed that history has repeated itself to some extent, although initially it did not involve new trains and the increased train length is an issue. And he assumes that the units are not intended to split. So I think this is a question around the train length and train length is an issue and how you work around that.
So the good news is that in terms of one of the things, Tim's right. At the end of the day, you do have to, if you've got a 12-car train, you have to then build your infrastructure around that 12-car train. And the good news, Mike, is that the shed at Crown Point has actually been extended. It's longer than it was when you were here. Literally, the end of it was 16 and 17 road has been chopped off and made longer to ensure that the 12-car train is not compromised in any of its exam and maintenance facilities. In fact, as part of that investment, which was led by, that was a GA investment, we've replaced the centre gantry, and not only do we have door level access, but we have a high level gantry at the roof level. I think I covered it in my last presentation. So much of the equipment on this train is on the roof. It's almost tram-like in that regard. We came to the conclusion very early on that for an efficient maintenance process, we would have not just have lanyard systems, but basically a roof level access that obviously interlocked with the 25 kV, that then means people can work on the roof safely without lanyards, anywhere down that train length. So, and we've worked quite a lot with Stadler to get that up and going and get that right. So there's no doubt the investment's gone into the depot. I'm surprised actually that during my presentation people didn't hear the jackhammers outside, because the work actually continues. We moved away. The original concept was a 12-car lifting facility, and that was held for quite a long time. But yeah, the concept of synchronized lifting 12 cars, that's, you know, how many spotters, how much equipment, how difficult that is. So we have moved away from that, and we're now moving to a bogie drop. And the bogie drop is being built in 14 Road in order to be able to do the bogie swaps. So again, the end of 14 Road's been chopped off. 14 Road is getting longer. So I can say, Mike, that in terms of the depot facilities, that hasn't been underinvested. Again, later than we would hoped, but that work is ongoing, and yeah, the maintainers at Crown Point have got enough pit space and the right facilities to do the job.
Brilliant. Yep. Thanks for that, Steve. So Deepthi asks, well, she mentions that you've explained how the learnings are being shared within Greater Anglia and Abellio, but if we see the railway fraternity as a whole, how can Greater Anglia share the learning to everyone else involved? So Tox, Roscoe's, manufacturers and Network Rail. So how does that, we've mentioned the sharing of knowledge inside GA, how does it happen outside?
So, and I think somebody hinted and said outside of these IMechE presentations. So, yeah, yep. First IMechE presentation, and secondly, if there is anybody, and you know, we have had for my previous presentations, we've had approaches. If there are people at that point where they think they will benefit from that lesson learning, I will be more than happy to set up an introduction with our surface introduction team, whether it's focused on one element that I've covered today or whether it's focused on the whole. I will be quite happy to facilitate that for anybody that's interested.
Brilliant. Yep. Thanks for that. So I've got two more points. So I've got one from Tim, Tim Duggar, who's just saying that he wants to comment that this was an excellent presentation with an honest view of the pluses and minuses of new trade introductions. And we've got Liz Lockwood, who's saying, not a question, but please pass on my thanks for an interesting talk from a former Porterbrook employee who was at the beginning of the Cascade of the Class 90s and Mark 3s. So some really good feedback there, which leads me quite nicely onto the vote of thanks. But just before I do that, I would like to thank all of you that have come along today for joining us. It's really, really important to us as a centre that you do continue to support us, because without your support, we aren't a centre without our attendees. So again, it really is appreciated that you do join us. If you would like to come along for our final event before the end of the year, we do have one left on the 2nd of December, and that is going to be Simon Scott from East West Rail, talking about East West Rail. We did actually cover East West Rail a couple of years ago. So what this will be a really interesting view into how the project has developed over the last couple of years and how it's going to develop over the next few years. So if you would like to join us for that, you are very welcome to do so. Steve, all that's left for me to do is thank you for coming along today. There's already been some really good feedback, which is always lovely to hear. Better late than never. I know we're looking to do this back in May, but due to the COVID situation, we did struggle. So thank you for your patience, and thanks for coming along in November and doing this virtually. It is much appreciated. What I would say that really struck me from your presentation was the worlds colliding slide. And it struck me because it was so accurate. And I think what we see as customers is a shiny new train pulling in, and it's all very exciting. And we can, for example, use the Wi-Fi on board, just enjoy the quieter journeys and the quicker journeys. But all of the things under the surface, such as depots and operations being affected, the amount of work that goes in there is just enormous, and it's a part that we don't see as customers. So that was really interesting. And things such as the environmental issues around cleaning a 12-car train was something that I'd certainly never appreciated. So that was really good. also completely agree with you that software is the name of the game. We see it time in, time out with new vehicle introductions. So, that was a really interesting one. I think it's something we're going to see more as time goes by. Um, so that's going to be it from me. Again, thanks for coming along and presenting. This is where we would do a clap if this was a face-to-face event. Unfortunately, we cannot do so. But we've also had Philip Hunt that's got in touch and said thanks for the presentation, fascinating topic. So we've had loads of feedback virtually, and that's great to hear. So thanks again, Steve, and thanks again to all of you that joined us this evening, and we will catch you all soon.
Thank you, Dom. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you.